Hey everyone, in today's video we are going to explore staining and non-staining paint. Whether or not the color of paint may stain will depend on how the paint is made and also on the surface that you are painting on. So here I have 4 heavy staining colors: permanent red, phthalo blue-green shade, perlin maroon, and azo yellow. The pigments in these 4 colors are very small, very tiny. So when you actually paint on the paper, those tiny particles will actually go into the paper fiber, and that makes it quite permanent and very difficult to lift the color off or remove the color. Phthalo colors are good examples of paint that stain heavily. Phthalo blue, phthalo green. If you have been to a museum where there is a no painting policy, well, one of the reasons is because if you accidentally drop a drop of paint onto the ground, onto the floor, it will be very difficult to wash off. And when you have paint like this on porous material like your t-shirt or on wood, it will be impossible to remove the stain. So why do people use staining paint? Well, one of the reasons is the colors are very intense, very vibrant. And because of the staining nature, they are good for artists who like to paint in layers, who like to glaze. So right now I'm going to paint a layer of red first. Wait for this to dry and glaze over with a yellow. Hopefully I can turn this car into an orange car. This has dried already, so let's glaze over the initial wash. So glazing colors, this technique, it's fun and exciting, but it's not a technique I use regularly or often because it's a very time-consuming technique. You have to wait for the paint to dry. So now I have yellow over the red. We'll wait for this to dry again. For non-staining paint, they can be lifted off after they are dry. You just need to clean your brush with clean water and go back onto the dry wash to pick up the paint. This can be good for achieving certain techniques. For example, you may want to lift the paint to create some clouds, or if you make a mistake, you can actually correct it easily by lifting the color. Whether or not the color will lift will depend sometimes on the paper that you use. So certain paper that is very porous would absorb the paint more into the paper fiber, and that makes it difficult for the colors to lift. So here I have cerulean blue. I'm going to wait for this to dry and we'll see if we can lift off the color, if we can remove the color off the paper. Now that this non-staining wash is dry, you can actually use a clean brush and pick up the paint. See how easily it is to pick up this paint. This is cerulean blue, PB35, and you can actually just lift off the color. And this is almost as clean as the initial watercolor paper. What I like to do is sometimes I would like to create soft clouds, so I would wet the tissue first with some water and go in to pick up the paint and try and soften the edges. So this is a bit softer compared to earlier on. So you can see this is softer, and here we have the hard edge. And now let's see if we can lift staining paint. So here I have painted these colors on a separate piece of paper, and as you can see, it's very difficult to lift the paint. If you use a lot of paint, yes, you can lift some of the paint, but if you are going with a light wash, it's very difficult. So permanent red, almost impossible to lift. I mean, you can lift some, but it's very difficult to lift that color. And now let's lift azo yellow. So this color is also very difficult to lift. You can still see the hard edge very visibly. With staining paint, when the wash is still wet, you can still lift it, but once it's dry, it's very difficult. So here I can actually surprisingly lift off some phthalo blue. I believe that's because I use a bit more paint here at the top. If you want to glaze or layer, I do recommend you test out the paint first. Even if the color is labeled as a staining color, you may not know how staining it actually is. So for phthalo blue here, I expected it to be very staining, but apparently not. I mean, it still stains heavily, but I was able to get a lighter wash of phthalo blue out of the initial wash. And the initial wash, it's still very vibrant, very intense. After you know which color is more staining or less, so you can decide the order of colors to use. So for example, azo yellow, it seems like it's less staining here. So this would be the first color I would use, followed by permanent red and then phthalo blue. The reason for that is when azo yellow is dry, when I paint it with permanent red over the yellow, I know that the yellow is not going to move, and later on when I paint phthalo blue over the red, I know that the red is not going to move as much. When you start with a less staining or non-staining color and you paint another layer over it, the initial wash, it may move. So the order of color that you use when it comes to layering or glazing techniques, it's actually important. So this is now dry. The red is definitely overpowering the yellow, the transparent yellow. So let me add a bit more yellow to the side here. By the way, notice that I have painted some swatches on the side. Alright, we'll wait for this to dry and see what happens later. So this is the second layer. With staining colors, you can apply layers upon layers, and the paint beneath, once it's dry, it's not going to lift. So these staining colors, they are great for layering. While waiting for that wash to dry, I'm also going to paint the wheels. The wheels are going to be black, so I'm going to paint them blue now, and later on glaze with red and yellow, and we'll see what happens. Glazing, to me, it's a bit more challenging. Actually, it's way more challenging compared to mixing the colors on the paper or mixing them on the palette and then applying them onto the paper. Because here you have to visualize how the colors will turn out after you apply the second layer, the third layer. It needs more planning, and you need a lot of experience when it comes to glazing. So now I'm painting blue, but I actually have no idea how it's going to turn out after I glaze it with red later on. Let's have some shadows beneath this car as well. So now it looks kind of weird. Alright, let's add red over the blue and see what happens. So it does appear to be darker. So this is the sketch that I have painted using glazing or layering techniques. This orange, this is not as vibrant or intense compared to what I had expected. So the colors that you use for mixing, it definitely matters, of course, it goes without saying. As for the blacks, I think this is dark enough. At least you can see the contrast between this and red and yellow. It's very strong contrast, so it looks like some sort of black. But if you look closer, it's actually not black. It's a mixture of colors that are layered on top of one another. But it's dark enough to appear, to give the illusion that it's black. It might be a good idea to create a watercolor chart using layering techniques so that you can get a clearer idea of what colors you can expect. Now this is a very fun technique. I like the separation of colors. You can still see the individual colors that are used to create a mixture. Here's another example. This time around I painted with a very light wash of red and with more yellow. So here you can see this car, it's more yellow versus the car above, which is more red. And here I used a lot more water, so the contrast is not as strong compared to the earlier sketch. As with glazing techniques, you can see the individual colors that were used to create the mixture. You can see this green here because of the blue and the yellow, and this area here we have red and blue. We have some green here and some red here as well. It's very fun to paint like this. But this technique requires a bit more time because you need to wait for the watercolor to dry before you add another color. So usually for me, I try to mix my colors on the paper or in the palette and then apply them onto the paper. When it comes to sketching outdoors, this is not a technique that I use very often. Although I do use layering when it comes to applying the shadow layer over my initial wash. But I do that with as few strokes as possible so as not to disturb the paint that is beneath, whether or not it's staining or non-staining. Alright, so that's the difference between staining and non-staining paint. Let me know in the comment section below whether you use layering techniques. Do you prefer to use staining versus non-staining paint? And what do you use layering techniques for painting? What are the subjects that you paint? Thanks for watching today's video. See you in the next one. Bye! Oh, before you go, I just want to let you know that I am selling off some of my excess watercolor paint to make space to get more colors to test and also make videos like this. So if you want to support me, help me out, you can check out the list of colors that I am selling. The link is in the video description below. Alright, see ya!